Professor was very profound in his remarks, and very outstandingly, he noticed that the world is actually unequal, quoting 62 richest people owning what 50% of the population of the world has. Do you share the sentiment that we are actually this unequal, or it's simply a blessing in disguise?
100% I do agree with what Professor was able to give us. But again, my look of the context was a different one. I was here to give a new kind of thought in the debate of on how we have to build an African brand as an alternative to the kind of world of neoliberal globalization. And in so, I'd come to vehemently convince you to a local term that the Muslims have. It's called Omubuyabuya in my local language. Omubuyabuya means a lost sheep, somebody who doesn't know exactly where to go. And you will agree with me that these terms are relative. Some of us, the similar term could be zombie. Some people are zombies at 70%, others at 90%, others at 60%. But it's in Africa, the way the West looks at us is that we are complete zombies, 70% and above. And the Pareto rule, 80-20 rule, is not a new concept. We have land councils here. They will tell us when you come to the land affairs and the management in the country, who owns 80% of the land, 20% owns 80% of the land we have. That's already an inequality. And the other day you had the president in Changwanzi. They moved a motion or resolution that for the country to develop its infrastructure and fast-track development, they always take up the land and then do the compensations later. But how did the population respond? The population, because the population are 90%, they do not recognize the captivity they are held in two by the land policy. We're talking about the global economics. An African doesn't understand quite well that it is so important to support the business of his fellow African, because in supporting the business of a fellow African, you're giving him economics, you're giving him the money. And in so doing, he's going to educate his child with the best education might be in the Europe where these capitalists are educating their children from. And that child will be back to change Africa where you live. You choose to support some other person's business who is going to take away the money. So do you know who you are? Do you really know your course of your horizon? And I'm saying we don't know yet. We're talking about fashion. Professor talked about fashion, everyone, including myself. By the way, in Uganda, including the head of state, everyone has a second-hand cloth. If we count 365 days, including the president could have a second-hand cloth on his, with him. Either it could be stockings or something else. But pure African, we're in that one. But let's look at this. Have we supported our industries that are trying to come up with my brother Uhuru's kind of design? Look on how smart he is today. Are we supporting them? Do we have the policies that support our own industries into this? Do we build the African brand and then market this brand so that it can be able to match with other products from the global market? We're not doing so.
If there is a position of investment coming from people that are not particularly nationals of our country, should we, in a way, not aid it so we can groom our own investment? Is that what we would advocate for, so as to have some equality? Would it then guarantee equality in our country?
to your question, I come from a world of possibilities. I come from a world of solutions. My name is Sheila Mpumuza, and I am the country director of Sawa World. We believe it's possible. You are the solution. If it's about investment of our own people, I'm very, very happy to say that I have seen it with my own two eyes. I come from the community where people who have not gone to school, in fact, I was telling Arari that yesterday I was at a seminar, a business plan competition organized by TechnoServe, and we were in Kayunga. The key thing was bringing a person who dropped out of school in P6. Now let's be realistic about this. This is a person who has kids. She's 15 years old, she's 18 years old. She dropped out of school, let's say P6, P7, others were S4. There was no person who had a diploma. And these were people that were so positive, that were very, very hopeful for tomorrow, for about empowerment, businesses. And they're talking about businesses like that sometimes, unfortunately, youth like us would ignore, business like making cakes, selling mandazi. But at the end of the day, they're putting back money. They're employing their kids, they're teaching their kids. This is something you can do. This is something you can do to empower yourself. You don't need to repeat the cycle. I feel that sometimes when I come to these conferences like this, in fact, I want to thank Operation Kindness. You get that feeling in your tummy where it's so uncomfortable. We're pinpointing people and saying you and this one and that one. We're not looking at ourselves. What have we done? What have you done? You know, we're young people, we're full of so much potential. Our local government, like the professor saying, you know, who is wearing a t-shirt that's made in Uganda? Most of us here would shun something that's made in Uganda. You'd be saying, that's what's made in Katwe. No, it's not of quality, you know? I want to be branded, I want the mark, I want the latest, I want show off. We're all about social class.
Sure, perhaps just to cut in, the question could also be what really can we do education when we don't have classrooms? What can we do when the products made at home are more expensive than those that come from China, than those that come from Europe, even those secondhand? What really can a peasant do?
I think, I don't even call them peasants, because, you know, a person who's putting food on a plate, who is a single mother, that is not a peasant. You know, I may be selling my mandazi on the street, I am not a peasant. I think what we could do is go back to the drawing board and support the single mothers and invest in the civil society. It's sad that sometimes organizations that are doing so much good are not given platform. In the news, you're going to hear all about the corruption, the embezzlement, this firm is opening up something. You're not going to know or hear about what's actually making a difference. I think what we could do is shed a light on a person in Kawala saying urban farming is the way to go, because those are the women we're working with, saying, you know what, I may not have a big land or a farm or whatever, but I could get my small jerry can, cut it into half and grow my own tomatoes. I think let's go back and empower, celebrate, talk about what's working, yeah?
Do we have a working system? Do we still have things like paralegals operating in this country that would help these people get knowledge about their rights and about what they are entitled to and what they can actually do? Do we have a civil society that is vibrant with your experience from civil society and working with them? Are they doing enough for our people to understand that equality can be sorted if they came together?
Well, let me first start by disagreeing with Professor Kiza that many people who speak about or speak against neoliberal ideals themselves cite scholars of neoliberal schools to advance that argument. For me, that's an irony. You're citing Cambridge professors. These are the architects of neoliberal ideals. If you want to understand that, you perhaps want to go and read the writings of people like Khaled Nabudere. And I think for me, the point that we need to start from is to admit that globalization is here to stay. It is irreversible because of advancement in technology, because of advancement in economic interconnectedness. Globalization is here to stay. The question then is, how do we find our place in that space? Do we have values? Do we have ideas to add to that space? Can we stand up to propose African values and African ideals that can compete? The Chinese have. They have refused to speak English. The Spaniards have. They don't speak English. If you go to the European Parliament, there are about 7 different languages being spoken. It begins from finding that identity, as opposed to playing the victim and saying neoliberal ideals have impoverished this country. That for me is the point to start. And I think that the term coined by the late Professor Nabudere of Glo Loco, so it's not an English word, but it essentially means think globally, act locally. I think the civil society organizations in this country are as guilty as Professor Kiza, because they've shaped their approaches and ideals on Western concepts of press statements, of going to hotels to have conferences and seminars and teas and allowances. I think we need to begin to find African ideals and African ways of organizing. Secondly, I think the legal profession also have to begin to reflect on whether the Western concepts of justice, of human rights, are really the kind of ideals that work and can resonate in our society. One of the books I love the most is a book by Okot Pibitek called The Artist and the Ruler, where he challenges Western concepts of justice, Western concepts of human rights. I think we've got to begin to ask those questions. If you don't begin to ask those questions and identify those value sets, then you're going to have Professor Kiza trained in Norway, in a neoliberal school, speaking a neoliberal language, using a neoliberal computer, and yet urging us to be African and find our space in that world. I think we've got to identify our own values as Africans. And for me, those values actually do exist. My father is 90 years old. He'll be 91 in September. If you sit down with him, is that me or somebody else? If you sit down with him and have a discussion, you'll find a lot of values in African systems and African ideals that institutions like Makerere could learn from. Because you can teach economic theories of the Chicago School of Economics. All of us know why it was designed that way. And produce first-class degrees that will never find jobs. And then you get a guy who is Facebooking, who has social networking skills, has human skills, getting a job before your first-class graduate. So I think we must examine our education system. Lastly, I propose that we need to reflect on the concept I call market socialism as an approach, as an answer to neoliberal world. That market socialism principle espouses 2 things. One is a market economy that essentially works around producing goods and services, and the other you have a state economy whose role in this overall infrastructure is to ensure that frameworks exist for welfare, for equality, and for equal opportunity. I would add very strongly that the delivery of social services such as electricity, power, water, road, whatever it is, must be the duty of the state, not the duty of private companies. If you want to understand the problem with that approach, which is what they call the Washington Consensus approach, the structural adjustment programs, look at what has happened in Greece. The bailout plan put together for Greece was put together by the European Union, the IMF, required that the Greek government must sell off power companies, water companies, and then essentially hand them over to Western capitals and Western companies. So my own view is we need to go back to placing the state at the heart of the production, supply, and regulation of essential services, so that we don't have UTL run by Libyans controlling our telecommunication. We don't have a failed company, Eskom in South Africa, running our power generation. I think for me, we've got to get there and then get a state that is willing to ensure social welfare. That would be the beginning of our challenge to neoliberal ideas.
Can therefore do things, should be entrenched in our people. But the question then comes to capacity, because a company like Eskom may not have an equivalent in Uganda. A company that tries to produce our power, however mild, may not be able to have a match in Uganda. How do we address ourselves to such challenges where we do not actually have a comparative entity locally and we want to have an alternative locally?
I don't doubt the ability of Ugandans to form businesses, to run businesses, to be able to produce power. I went to a house of a gentleman who used to be a Minister of State for Works. He stays in Kapchorwa. He doesn't use national water. He doesn't use member power. He generates his own power. I think that we can generate power. The question is not about our ability, but rather, is the state in Uganda willing to provide that opportunity for African Ugandan businesses to try their hands at running power or at running our insurance companies?
The feminist idea that seems to crop up every time Professor Kiza speaks about globalization. Do we have a challenge with cultures when it comes to addressing our own equality challenges? Because we have a situation where our cultures dictate some things that keep us in cohesion, but there are some ideals that come as a result of what we call knowledgeable growth in our people that seem to elevate the minds of our people. Say the women feel we can be a little higher. Is that in itself a deterrent to our equality? Before we even speak about the economic perspective, just the social perspective, can we first harmonize that?
For Operation Kindness, for you to succeed with the idea of kindness and neoliberalism, there is an interview I read online about a certain psychoanalyst in US. He's called Adam Phillips. He was interviewed at one time on one of those Thanksgiving days in US and was asked, we rarely come across kindness these days. And his answer was, how do you tell a boxer to box kindly? It's a big mismatch. Now, on that note, we as a generation that is struggling with so much that Nicholas Opio is fighting with, every one of these members on the panel are fighting with. For you to arrive at that idea of having a kind society within a neoliberal globe, you have to understand how much the designers or the architects are willing to do to defend it, and then you know where to start your own battle. When America had just been founded, there was a time actually they termed that era the era of reason. Yeah, the age of reason. There were famous writers. One of them is called Thomas Paine, is one of my favorite authors of that time. They taught something called individualism. And when you think about realism, which you are trying to deal with in international politics today, it explains to you why these inequalities are existing today. In 1200, when the Magna Carta was done, people were fighting, similar things. Some people being left out by the church and all these things in Britain. Yeah, when the Americans went to establish America, they were fighting the same thing. But here we are facing something that you could arguably say is the same we are here to discuss.
Endogenous innovation is deliberately stifled through the policies we adopt. Our policy makers, and by extension implementers, are more of donor orientation conscripts. They promote foreign interests at the expense of our local innovativeness or endogenous. They represent exogenous. Jackie is talked about the consensus that emerged after 1938. I believe we're talking about multilateralism. The present epoch of globalization is an offshoot of that multilateralism. And multilateralism did not emerge by accident. It was a concerted effort by private capital, and by extension what we now call multinational companies, that set the agenda and therefore have been the drivers of globalization. You go on any of these multilateral institutions, the Bretton Woods, the WHOs of this world, the boards are largely representative of private capital, and the private capital representing the North Atlantic, or more specifically, Westminster, Washington, D.C. consensus. We have to have a concerted effort towards a certain direction. But my bigger part of the worry is that the youth of today do not seem to have I'm not here to judge, but my understanding, because I taught at university for some time, some 11 years of my life, not really long, but fairly long to form some kind of, have an informed opinion about what goes on amongst young people. So the young people do not seem to have a rallying point. There's no rallying point amongst the young people. When you looked at the people now running affairs in this country, those who are aging towards 70 or a little past 70, I'm not talking of the 80 plus, but the ones in their 70s, late 60s. In the 60s when they were at high school, and 70s when they were at university, they had a strategy for the African people.
Ms. Salana Kembalazi, the idea that we can organize and rally around something particular. Have we not bypassed that stage as a nation and as young people, that we are now so different, especially along political lines and even along economic lines, that we can no longer rally around something? How can we come back from that position into a rally point and then have our dimensions, have our goals set towards a kind of world, have one pursuit? Is it still possible to arrive at that? And how would it happen?
Tough questions. So first of all, Malana Kembalazi, I work with the initiative, I'm reading institute and getting confused myself. Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, and the idea is to advance the full realization of social and economic rights in Uganda and in East Africa. And I've been hearing a lot of the panelists bring up great comments about, one, just our place in what is an unavoidable phenomenon. We are going to be part of a globalized world whether we want or not. And I think the key question is, how do we set our terms? How do we ensure that we are working towards a more equitable world, that the vulnerable are catered for? Most of you are familiar with the veil of ignorance, the whole idea that if you do not know what your place would be in a new society, you would ideally design something that's a bit more just, because you'll be thinking about the most marginalized. And I think for me that's a uniting point, regardless of our political ideology. I think thinking our strategies, are these strategies here going to get us a more equitable world? We live in a world which is deep inequity. They say the poverty levels are declining, but we do know that almost half of the population is poor or vulnerable to poverty. That means anything can just push them over the line. It could be the fact that a family member gets ill and there's just no way to get health care, and they have to sell their possessions or mortgage something, and bam, they're back into poverty. We live in a world in which many of the students that are growing up in Uganda right now are not just capable of taking on their place because of ridiculous education systems. I mean, you're familiar with the recent article where the government actually acknowledged that half the people in UP could not read. All right. To think deeply, to remembering that your goal is a more equitable world, think about what is working, what are your talents. And I think I'm very much in favor of the panelists today who spoke about African and homegrown solutions. I am a lawyer and I'm a human rights advocate, and I struggled initially with the discourse of human rights because I kept thinking, does this really reflect me as a Ugandan? Does this reflect my society? Does it reflect my goals? And I'm still a big fan because I think it's ultimately about ensuring dignity for every single person. So there will be different ways to get there. Some of you might be economists, some of you might be, financiers, some of you might be doing different careers. I think ensuring that whatever you're doing, remembering those concepts, and also putting pressure on the state. I think I like the panelists who spoke about the state's responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. I think with all that's going on, we have an NDP which says private sector-led growth, and the private sector will be the way to realize our national development plan.
Yes, but the state doesn't get to put up its hands and say, thank you very much, we can leave it to the private sector. I think remembering that the state has a responsibility to regulate, to take measures to ensure that when it's investing, when it's making fiscal policy decisions like whether or not to grant tax havens or invest in large infrastructure projects, it's also thinking about its responsibility to devote maximum available resources to realizing things like socioeconomic rights. So, yeah.